Today's story began like the script of a Hollywood thriller. However, it was not immediately clear whether there was a perpetrator or only victims. One thing, however, was certain: not everyone survived this incident. Kaylin Gillis was born in 2003 into a family living in the small town of Schuylerville, New York. Her parents had bought a large house in a quiet, comfortable neighborhood in order to start a family and raise children. Around 1,000 people lived there, leading calm and peaceful lives. Kaylin grew up surrounded by nature, graduated from the local high school, and planned to go to college. The young woman dreamed of becoming either a marine biologist or a veterinarian because she had always loved animals. She was a kind and cheerful person who enjoyed helping both animals and people. Compassion for those in need was something Kaylin understood deeply. That year, she had turned 20. She applied to study marine biology at a college in Florida and was waiting for a response. In the meantime, she worked so she could save money. She wanted to become as independent from her parents as possible. She also spent time with her boyfriend, Blake Walsh, and enjoyed being with her friends. Kaylin was quite popular at school. She had a warm relationship with everyone who knew her. April 15th was a typical Saturday. Kaylin woke up in the morning. She did not work that day, so she spent her time relaxing at home. After lunch, she began getting ready for an evening get-together with friends. She and her friends, including Blake, had been invited to a party that was supposed to take place later that evening. After 9 p.m., she called her boyfriend. He picked her up in his Ford Explorer SUV. They were going to drive to a small town called Hebron. Kaylin got into the passenger seat, and they drove to a supermarket in their hometown. Their other friends were waiting for them there. Another car with 2 young people, a young man and a young woman, joined the group. One more person arrived on a motorcycle. Right at the beginning of the meeting, he explained that his motorcycle was not in good condition and might stall whenever they stopped. The young man believed he could still make it to the house where the party was being held, and he planned to take the motorcycle for repairs on Monday. A convoy of 2 cars and 1 motorcycle set off toward Hebron, unaware of how the journey would end. When they arrived in Hebron late that Saturday evening, the young people discovered that they had no cell phone reception. From the directions, they knew which dirt road they were supposed to turn onto. But in the twilight, all the roads looked the same. Worse still, because of the poor connection, the GPS devices did not work, and their phones lost signal several kilometers before the first turn. They had to rely entirely on the directions their friends had given them. The house had to be found using the description they had received earlier. They thought the house where the party was being held should be easy to recognize. The problem was that the area was very remote, and each house had a long driveway. They all looked similar, and none of them stood out. The group turned onto a long dirt road and continued driving, hoping they had not made a mistake. However, after driving for about 3 kilometers and finally seeing a large house, they noticed that no lights were on inside. Obviously, a party was supposed to be loud, but this place was completely quiet. A few dozen meters from the house, Kaylin opened the window and turned toward her friends, who were driving slowly beside Blake's car. She said that they had apparently made a mistake. To turn around, they would have to drive closer to the house, where there was a little more space. The young people confirmed that no lights were on, and that no party was taking place there. Now they wanted to turn around, continue driving, and check the next road and the next house. The young man on the motorcycle did not want to stop. If he let off the throttle, the motorcycle might stall. So he revved the engine several times. The engine roared loudly. At that moment, the lights came on inside the house. Blake's car was the second vehicle to arrive. The first car managed to turn around, but Blake hesitated and let his friends pass. Kaylin turned around and saw a man run out onto the porch after the lights came on. He was holding a gun. He immediately fired into the air, followed by a second shot. The young people were so frightened that they drove away at once. Blake hit the gas pedal. After about 100 meters, he noticed out of the corner of his eye that Kaylin was breathing heavily and was silent, even though the situation must have shaken her at least as much as it had shaken him. He asked her if she was okay, but she did not answer. When he looked at her and turned on the car's interior light, he saw that Kaylin was bleeding heavily. Blake was so shocked and frightened that he pulled onto the shoulder of the road after driving several miles in only a few minutes because he knew they desperately needed help. He later said that it felt as if only seconds had passed. That was how intense the adrenaline rush was. Throughout the drive, he tried to call 911, but because there was no cell phone service, he could not get through. When he finally got a signal, Blake Walsh immediately called emergency services. At 9:45 p.m., the dispatcher received a call from a distraught young man. He was terrified and explained that his 20-year-old girlfriend, Kaylin Gillis, was seriously injured. According to Blake, she had been shot in the neck by an unknown man who had stepped onto his porch. The young woman was unresponsive. The dispatcher told Blake how to give first aid. He followed the instructions precisely while emergency responders drove to the scene. The situation appeared extremely serious. Police officers were the first to arrive. They found a group of young people, a young woman showing no signs of life, and Blake, who was covered in blood. Paramedics were also sent to the location. The police officers feared that Kaylin was already dead. Her boyfriend was trembling, crying, and pleading for help. Unfortunately, she was already unresponsive. They were unable to save her. Kaylin died from a gunshot wound to the neck that caused severe bleeding. Paramedics pronounced her dead. Police officers immediately examined the cars and belongings of the young people who had called them. Almost immediately, they considered the possibility that someone from the group might have shot her. Blake's SUV was not visibly damaged. Despite the story about the man with the gun, Blake said that Kaylin had been riding with the window down. None of the young people had a firearm on them. However, they could theoretically have thrown one away. So the entire group was taken to the police station to clarify all the circumstances of the incident. In the meantime, Kaylin's body was taken for an autopsy. The medical examiner determined that there was a single gunshot wound to the neck and that it had been fatal. There were no signs of a struggle or sexual assault. At that point, it seemed that the group of friends was telling the truth. However, investigators still had to verify everything. Investigators spoke with the young people. 3 of them were Kaylin's friends, and 1 was her boyfriend. It was not easy to calm them down. They were shaken by what had happened and insisted that they had not provoked the shooter in any way. The perfect Advent gift available on Amazon. Link in the description. While the police continued speaking with the young people and confirming that they had nothing to do with Kaylin's shooting, a patrol car drove to the place where, according to Blake Walsh, the shots had been fired. Officers found the house without difficulty, using the victim's description. However, when they arrived and knocked on the door, no one answered. One of the officers walked around the building and shone a flashlight through the windows. He noticed movement inside and heard noises. Meanwhile, the second officer examined the property with a flashlight. He discovered tire tracks showing that several cars had driven away from the scene in a hurry. The officers continued trying to contact the homeowner and explained that they had heard gunshots and had come to check whether everything was all right. After a few minutes, the lights came on in the house. The door was opened by a man who identified himself as Kevin D. Monahan. He was 65 years old at the time of the shooting and lived with his wife, Jinx Monahan, in Hebron. At first, Kevin denied that any young people had come to his house. However, after the address was checked and confirmed, the man changed his story. He now claimed that late that evening, a group of young people who had arrived on his property in cars and on a motorcycle had tried to attack him. He said he had been forced to go outside with a firearm to scare them away and had fired one shot into the air. However, because he was afraid and because the lighting was poor, he said he tripped over nails protruding from the porch, causing the shotgun to fall from his hand. As it fell, another shot was allegedly fired. Kevin insisted that he had no idea he had injured anyone because he had not intended to shoot anyone. When he was told that Kaylin had died from being shot in the neck, he showed little emotion and repeated that it had been unintentional and accidental. The man claimed that he and his wife had been frightened by loud noises late in the evening. When they looked out the window, they saw a group of unfamiliar young people who, in his opinion, did not appear friendly. They were making a lot of noise and moving around right in front of his house. Considering the time of night and the fact that he and his wife lived in a remote, isolated area, they found the situation very frightening. Kevin's shotgun was confiscated for ballistic testing. Laboratory experts confirmed that Kaylin had been shot with that exact weapon. The projectiles fired from the shotgun, as well as the projectile removed from the victim's body, showed matching markings. Those markings are like fingerprints left by the barrel on the surface of a projectile, and they are unique to each firearm. When Kevin was taken to the sheriff's office for official questioning, he continued to insist that he was innocent and that he had not intended to kill anyone. The man repeated that the young people had tried to attack his family and that he had not meant to fire a second shot, but only wanted to scare away the seduced attackers by firing into the air. According to Kevin, his shotgun was old. He claimed that he had repeatedly experienced problems with its mechanism while hunting. The weapon, he said, was defective. He insisted that this was why the second shot was fired when the shotgun fell. The weapon underwent a thorough examination, but no defect was found that could explain the alleged tragic accident. However, the defense continued to argue that this possibility could not be completely ruled out. By that time, law enforcement had already informed Kaylin Gillis's family that the young woman had died. They were all shocked by the tragedy and believed that her death could not have been a simple accident. Investigators carefully checked everyone involved in the case, As it turned out, the young people had no criminal records. Kaylin and her boyfriend Blake had no serious criminal history. Blake was found to have only a few parking tickets. Everyone described the group as decent and sensible young people who wanted to succeed professionally, start families, and were not prone to violence. The suggestion that they might have tried to break into a stranger's house at night or mock the owners seemed absurd to everyone who knew them. The suspect, Kevin Monahan, and his wife were also seen by some as ordinary Americans, living separately from their adult children, who had already started their own families. Their children were also interviewed and were so surprised that their parents were involved in anything like this. Kevin had owned his rural property for many years. The man had no major criminal record in New York. Some neighbors described him as someone who was not constantly in conflict with others, but who could be nervous and easily irritated. The elderly couple lived in a very remote and isolated area, so even passing cars could frighten them. At first, the story seemed believable, especially considering the late hour. However, not everyone believed it. Kevin persisted in his version of events. He insisted that he and his wife had been very frightened by the noise they had heard, which had woken them. His wife remained inside the house, while he, as the head of the household and protector of his wife, took his firearm outside to drive away the unwelcome visitors. Jinx Monahan also supported Kevin's version and confirmed his words. She explained that the noise near their house had lasted too long to be just random passing cars that would have immediately driven away. If the visitors had truly turned around right away, she said, Kevin would not have left the house at all. According to her statement, he was forced to go outside and even take the shotgun because the motorcycle outside sounded threatening. Jinx said they had heard about a criminal biker gang operating in the area, so they suspected that the gang had found them. Why had they not called the police? Kevin had difficulty answering that question. His wife said she had thought about it, but she believed patrol officers would not arrive in such a remote area before it was too late. When Kevin returned, they calmed down. According to their version, he did not know that he had shot Kaylin. Jinx Monahan did not witness the incident outside because she had hidden in the back of the house and did not know that her husband might have killed or injured anyone. The young people who were with Kaylin continued to insist that the whole thing had lasted no more than a few minutes. They only needed time to understand what had happened, realize that this was not the right house, try again, to contact the group hosting the party, and then leave. It later turned out that they had simply taken the wrong turn. The party was taking place not far from the Monahan's house. The very next day, Kevin Monahan was charged with second-degree murder and tampering with evidence. He continued to plead not guilty. Kaylin's family insisted that she had not died in an accident. They believed the shooter had fired intentionally. However, the evidence was not enough for a first-degree murder charge. The prosecution still wanted to achieve the strongest possible conviction. According to investigators, the young people who arrived at the Monahan property in cars and on a motorcycle posed no threat. That much, they said, was obvious. One officer stated at a press conference that he was 100% certain. This group, he said, consisted of children from respectable families who could not reasonably be mistaken for bikers or gangsters. Investigators reached those conclusions after interviewing the families, checking criminal records, and speaking with neighbors, employers, and teachers. All described the young people as decent, quiet, and responsible. Police also stated that this was a rural area with unpaved roads, where it was easy to get lost. The group drove only a few minutes along that road to Kevin's house, realized their mistake, and were preparing to leave when the homeowner came out and fired 2 shots. After the indictment, Kevin Monahan was taken to the Washington County Jail, where he was to await trial. Based on the charges against him, he faced a possible life sentence. When the press conference announced that the man accused of killing the 20-year-old woman had been arrested and was awaiting trial, the case caused a major public outcry. The local community was deeply disturbed by Kevin Monahan's actions. But that was not the only reason people were alarmed. His behavior raised broader concerns, especially because of another shooting that had happened just days before Kaylin Gillis's death. Kansas City, a 16-year-old boy named Ralph Yarl had gone to pick up his younger brothers from a babysitter. This also happened in the evening. The high school student was doing this in an unfamiliar area, while his parents were at work. By mistake, he rang the wrong doorbell. Instead of telling him that the babysitter lived at another address, the homeowner, Andrew Lester, opened fire. He shot Ralph twice. The teenager survived, but the incident shocked the country. During questioning, Lester claimed that he had mistaken the boy for a burglar. In reality, Ralph was a gifted student and musician with a promising future. Ralph's shooting raised questions about gun ownership and self-defense. People were outraged by these events, especially because Ralph, like Kaylin, was harmless, far removed from criminal activity, came from a respectable family, and was focused on his future. After analyzing the circumstances, investigators concluded that neither in Ralph's case nor in Kaylin's case had anyone truly threatened the shooters. According to prosecutors, the attacks were triggered by irrational fear or rage toward people who had simply made a mistake. Clearly, none of them deserved to be shot. At the press conference, many of Kaylin's family members and friends spoke. Her boyfriend, Blake Walsh, who had been with her at the time of the shoots, spoke with deep emotion. He had tears in his eyes as he delivered his statement. Kaylin's father was outraged. Kevin Monahan had robbed him of the chance to see his daughter achieve her dreams and build a future. Blake said he first met Kaylin in 2021 when they both graduated from high school. After that, they became inseparable. Statistically, couples like that often break up, but Kaylin and Blake joked that they would be among the rare couples who marry after high school and stay together for life. He had big plans for his life with Kaylin. He dreamed of starting a family with her. They wanted to get married after graduation. In a television interview, Blake explained that Mr. Monahan had shattered his world that Saturday night. The young man said he would attend the bail hearing. He was under enormous stress and wanted to see the man who had taken his beloved girlfriend's life. Both he and Kaylin's parents were convinced that justice would prevail and that the perpetrator would receive the punishment he deserved. When Kevin Monahan appeared in court, his attorney argued that his client would not flee and could therefore be placed under house arrest until the hearing. The defense attorney emphasized that Monahan had owned the house near which the shooting occurred for more than 30 years and was a respected member of the community. Everyone, he said, knew him as a reliable person. Kevin Monahan owned a small business. Despite all of this, the court decided to keep him in custody without bail. The hearing on charges of murder, reckless endangerment, and tampering with physical evidence was scheduled to proceed, and Kevin remained in custody. When the trial began, the defense's position was clear. Monahan did not agree with the prosecution's version of events. According to his lawyer, late at night, 2 cars and a motorcycle, with engines roaring, drove onto the man's property and terrified him and his wife. All of this happened while the lights in the house were off. The defense argued that it seemed strange that the young people had not realized from a distance that a house occupied by partygoers would probably have lights on, noise, and other vehicles nearby. The Monahans claimed they had no idea who these people were or what they were doing there. Therefore, they were frightened and mistook them for dangerous intruders. The first shot, according to the defense, was fired to scare away the unwelcome visitors. However, in the darkness, the man allegedly tripped over nails protruding from the porch and dropped the shotgun. Because of an alleged defect in the mechanism, the weapon fired again as it fell. By chance, the bullets struck Kaylin Gillis and caused a fatal injury. The lawyer spoke confidently. He explained that whenever there is a victim and a tragedy, everyone wants to see a villain. However, according to the defense, there is not always one. The defense attorney insisted that what happens was the result of a series of tragic coincidences. The prosecution maintained that Kevin Monahan and his wife had not been threatened under any circumstances. Judging by the tire marks, which were carefully examined near the end of the driveway, the cars and motorcycle had already begun moving away in a straight line. That meant they had already turned around and were preparing to leave. If the situation had happened as Kevin claimed, there would have been marks from a sudden sharp turn. There was no reason to believe that the young people, even though they had arrived late at night, posed any danger to the couple. This was especially true of Kaylin Gillis. The suggestion that the young woman might have been involved in a crime sounded absurd to everyone who knew her. The defense argued that the young people had stayed near the house long enough to frighten the elderly couple and cause Kevin to act under the influence of fear. In closing arguments, the prosecutor told the jury that the defendant had acted in anger. He simply wanted to drive away the unwanted visitors without considering the circumstances. He did not care whether he injured or killed someone. At the very least, the prosecution argued, he had shown criminal recklessness. This was also reflected in his lack of remorse and in the way he handled the situation afterward. Kevin Monahan testified in his own defense and continued to say that the fatal shot was accidental. The jury, however, reached a verdict in less than 2 hours. Kevin Monahan was found guilty of second-degree murder, reckless endangerment, and tampering with physical evidence. The judge sentenced Kevin Monahan to 25 years to life in prison for murder. He would also received additional time for tampering with physical evidence, while the reckless endangerment sentence was handled separately according to the court's decision. The judge stated that Monahan deserved the maximum sentence allowed by law. Friends and family members of Kaylin Gillis were present in the courtroom for the sentencing. They were relieved by the decision and wept as they embraced one another. Kaylin's father expressed hope that the perpetrator would never be released. Monahan's lawyer, however, stated that he would seek an appeal. As Kevin Monahan was led from the courtroom, Kaylin's family applauded. Shouts of "Cord" followed him. New York politicians and public officials condemned the growing use of firearms in situations where there was no real threat. This incident once again raised serious concerns about gun violence and about laws governing the use and carrying of firearms. Kaylin's friends and family created a GoFundMe campaign to cover funeral expenses and support the family. By the time of sentencing, they had raised more than $100,000. Kevin Monahan was later transferred into state custody after sentencing. His attorney continued fighting the conviction and argued that the trial had been affected by public attention surrounding not only Kaylin's death, but also other similar cases, including the shooting of Ralph Yarl. On February 14th, 2025, Andrew Lester, the man who shot Ralph Yarl, pleaded guilty to second-degree assault. However, while awaiting sentencing, the 86-year-old man died of natural causes on February 19, 2025. Ralph Yarl survived the shooting, but his case, like Kaylin Gillis's, became part of a national conversation about fear, firearms, and the deadly consequences of mistaking innocent people for threats. Thanks for watching, and take care.